Hi there. Good morning. So Sunday morning, we're about a month, or not a month, a week out from next Sunday. I'll be uh, preaching at my home church on Father's Day, and I, you know what? Have been a whole lot of different things, one way or another, about people having feelings about what I've shared one way or another. And, well, I'm going to just share this story and let it land where it may. Um, a lot of people will assume because of the way that I live my life and because I called to ministry and other things that I must have grew up with some, holy roller type of parents and everything, and it was all great and good. Or it was totally the opposite, that, yeah, there wasn't anything, and it was one of those, saved from the gutter sort of things. Neither was the case in my case. But all of my life growing up, the only reason I'm even Southern Baptist like I am is because my mother brought me to church and made it important that I go to church. Now, my dad was not a bad man. He was not abusive. He was not, I mean, the closest you might say is based on what people think someone should do with their sons. Uh, I guess you could try and make a case for neglect, but, you know, neglect sometimes is from the perspective of the person receiving it, and if we're not getting what we think we should be getting, we might perceive that as neglect, even though they're giving plenty in a lot of other ways that it may take time to realize. Well, so it wasn't until much later. I only knew my dad to go to church for one of two things: to go for weddings if he had to, and to go for funerals. In fact, I was really amazed at one point when he went to a funeral because of it being one of our nearby neighbors, and I just never knew him to be all that super close to the man, but he was close to him in age, and it just really affected and kind of touched my dad when he passed and he wanted to go to his funeral. Um, so I gradually learned a little bit more of my dad's faith story. Um, he had been an active young person in church and church life, um, even as a senior in high school. When he passed away, I was given a thing that had belonged to him. It was a copy he was given as a senior of, I can't remember the name of it, but it's the story from which the kind of what would Jesus do sort of idea came from. The Charles Sheldon book, I believe it is. Anyway, not important to the story, but he even got up to the point where within his particular denomination, um, he was even kind of like a deacon, which the deacon wasn't the same as it is in Baptist life per se. It's not an elder, but it is a person that serves within their church. And they were, him and some other family relations were serving on a committee, from what I have heard of the tale. And they both did what young people did in those days of going out and having a good time. Uh, some of the behavior might be questionable for what good, upstanding church folks might think was right to do, but it was a case of they were each doing these sorts of things, but they got at odds on a particular issue that they were voting on or dealing with, and that relative of my father's called him out as a hypocrite for what he was doing on the weekends, knowing that the other person did the same things just with a different group of people. And so at that point, I think that started the downward spiral, and my dad eventually kind of left the church. And later, when he had a divorce, a separation. So I have a half brother and half sister, and later down the line, he met the person that would be my mom, and he knew that she was a person of faith and went to church, and she's been an organist as long as I've been alive, plus some, of playing the organ within church services and such. And so he tried to go back into church, get back involved. He goes into a church of a Sunday morning, and it didn't have anything to do with looks. It didn't have anything to do with anything they knew about him. It didn't have anything to do with any of that. He sat down in a pew of a Sunday morning for a worship service. Usher came forward, tapped him in the shoulder, and told him he would have to move. He was in someone else's seat. I think in his heart, he committed to not ever take up anybody else's seat from that point forward. And he never darkened the door of the church for worship almost all of my life. And, they say in Scripture the sins of the father are visited to the third and fourth generations, and I've felt that sting many times, that temptation, because of what some church people do and the way some church people are. But I haven't, because of my faith and because of my relationship with Christ. It's not a bunch of things that someone has indoctrinated me to think. I have a personal relationship based on study of the Word personally. And my dad still shocked me towards the later years of his life. My youngest son, we were at church, and Baptist church life, baby dedication is not a huge thing. I mean, it's a thing that the family gets together for, but theologically it's not some huge thing like the denomination that my dad came from, where, things like baptizing when they're a baby or an infant are a means of grace to cover you until the point where you can actually make a commitment to God for yourself. And so it wasn't that kind of thing for us, but my dad shocked me when the idea that we were going to have this baby dedication coming up for our youngest, he wanted to come, wanted to be there. And he did. And didn't stay long. I mean, he was gone just about as quick as the service was over. But I was just shocked that here this newborn little kid could break through decades of just barriers between my dad and not so much faith in God, but faith in the people that called themselves his Christians, his believers. And I guess the point that I'm trying to make in all of this is I know that my dad had, I wouldn't necessarily say they were addictions, because he could break them, turn them off pretty much at the drop of a hat with choosing to do so. But he had vices, you know. He smoked for most of the point until lungs and other things got so bad that he was having to take breathing treatments, and so he stopped. I mean, but he had stopped on a dime for a full year just to win a bet. So it's, you know, he drank some. I mean, never, you know, rarely did I ever see him even what someone would consider tipsy or buzzed. But, you know, he drank. He liked to go to the boats like a lot of people covertly undercover like to do. And so he had his vices, you know. I'm not going to pretend that he didn't. And those were all things that he chose. Anyway. But I'm not going to try and pretend either that I know the whole of what his relationship with God was. I'm not going to try and just Pollyanna pretend that, okay, yeah, he made it, and mold and shape the rules, the law, the way that God set up this universe. I'm not gonna fudge on what has been handed down to me as the gospel and the truth just to make sure that he ends up in the in crowd in what I believe. You know, if he did truly have a relationship and a faith commitment with Christ, I will be more than overjoyed to see him in eternity. But if that's not true, and that's not the case, and it was put on for a season, but it wasn't real, I'm still, I guess, working through and making my peace with the fact that I won't see him again. And that's a hard thing to say. And some of you might count me cruel for even thinking it. But I'm just being realistic here. And so, I guess the reason I say that is because, you know what? There are two things I cannot say. One, I cannot say that God made my dad someone to be condemned. Okay? That's inconsistent with what I know of God, and it's inconsistent with what I know of my dad. And then two, I cannot brush under the rug and say a lot of the things that he did in his life were not sin. I mean, it was what it was. Those were choices and decisions that he made, and they are choices and decisions that, from seeing his example, I know that I have those same weak spots or blind spots in my own life that I have to be careful of. And it's been especially tough, especially since being in ministry, and especially for getting a bad role as far as like one of the only full-time vocational ministry positions I ever had that wasn't basically volunteer. Where they forcibly resign you as if you were some horrible pervert, sex offender, or something else. And in reality, it was just, you're not exactly what we were looking for. So, bye. So, I don't know if there's much of a point to this early morning. This is more of an early morning ramble than first thought. But, it'll be obvious who actually listens to the words I say versus takes one little buzz clip of a few words and decides that, oh, he's talking about that. So, till next time.